Here we go. Hello and good afternoon to everyone in Denver. Good evening to everyone in Britain, where our guest is from. My name is Adam. I am the director of events for Tattered Cover bookstore in Colorado. Tonight we have an amazing guest who has been writing books for a very long time and has so many great books. I'm of course talking about Mr. Jeffrey Archer. He has written novels and short stories that include the Clifton Chronicles, the William Moore novels, Cain and Abel, and Cat O' Nine Tails. They've topped bestseller lists across the world and have sold over 275 million copies. He's the only author to ever been the #1 bestseller in fiction, short stories, and nonfiction at the same time, or throughout the career. I'm sorry. He is a member of the House of Lords for over a quarter of a century. He is married to Dame Mary Archer. They have 2 sons, 2 granddaughters, and 2 grandsons. Jeffrey Archer, welcome. Thank you for talking to us this evening.
Thank you. I now have 3 grandsons.
3 grandsons. Your publisher needs to update your
2 granddaughters.
Well, thank you so much. And it's clear you have written so many books that so many people love. And I just want to start with taking back to the beginning. Why write fiction? Why thrillers? Why did you get into this?
I was a member of Parliament, and a very young member of Parliament. I'd entered the House at the age of 29, which is too young in my opinion, and was a bad mistake. I invested foolishly in a company called Aquablast on the advice of the Bank of Boston. And I got myself into debt for £400,000 because I'd been advised by the bank that these shares would double. Well, they were being run by a crook, and I lost everything. And I left the House of Commons, and I couldn't get a job. So I confess the first book, Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, was as much to take up time and keep me working, because I hate not doing something. And indeed, 16 publishers turned it down. Everyone turned it down. And finally it sold to Jonathan Cape, and they published 3,000 copies, and they just about sold them. And then it went into paperback. And I went on to a second book, which did all right. But you're quite right. The breakthrough was Cain and Abel. I mean, that sold worldwide 1 million books in the first week, and has now sold 37 million and has been read by 100 million people. So that was the breakthrough. That changed my whole life. And that was the third book.
In your first book that you mentioned, Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, it's based off that bankruptcy you're just referencing.
Just what I've described to you. It's 4 men who between them lose a fortune through their stupidity. And they come together. They don't know each other, but they come together. But they know who's stolen it. Mm-hmm. And they have to steal it back. Not a penny more, not a penny less. They mustn't steal more from him than he stole from them. Otherwise, they'd be thieves. So that was the simple premise. Mm-hmm. And it couldn't be much more simple. And fun writing. I enjoyed it. But it had never crossed my mind that would be my profession. That would be the job I would do for the next 40 years.
And over the course of 40 years, you've written countless books. Do you pull from your personal life, or where are all these ideas coming from after all these years?
I think I'm very lucky. I think I'm a storyteller, and I think I'm lucky. I think they come every day, literally. What I didn't realize when I was a member of Parliament, though most members of Parliament are storytellers, I didn't realize when I was a member of Parliament that I had this weird gift, because it is a gift, Adam. I'm not a ballet dancer. I'm not a piano player. I don't paint pictures. I tell stories. And that's a gift. Writing is a skill. And writing can come from being very well educated, very well read. And so almost anyone who is in that category can write. But the gift to tell a story, to make you turn the page, that's a piece of luck.
And what is your approach to writing? I read that you don't like to outline. Is that correct?
Correct. I get up in the morning. My working day is I get up 5:30. I start work at 6. I do 6 until 8 for 2 hours. I then take a 2-hour break, and I do 10 until 12 for 2 hours. So I go for a walk, have lunch. I do 2 until 4 for 2 hours. Take another break, go back. The final session of the day is 6 until 8. And I get to bed about 9:30, 10. I don't like to be late. Up again at 5:30. First draft, probably 40 days, 300 hours, around 300 hours. And the book you have in front of you is the 14th or 15th draft. Everyone handwritten, because I can't type and I don't know how to use a laptop. I'm a Luddite at that level. In any case, I like writing. I like the feel of the pen moving across the paper. So that's the process, and that's the way I do it. And it hasn't changed in 40 years. In fact, I will be up at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning doing just that.
Well, I'm keeping you up quite late your time too, so I'll keep going with these.
No. It's very reasonable.
And from first draft to 15th draft, what are you changing? What are you looking for every time you move forward?
The first draft isn't much more than the story. And I confess the story doesn't change much between the first draft and the 15th. If you looked at the paper, you would think it would have probably changed 50%. The writing may have changed 50%, but the story is probably there. And after that, and I've learned this over the years, you become a better craftsman. You know where the pitfalls are, you know where the problems are. So you start the next draft with that knowledge in your head after 27 novels. So it doesn't get any easier. I can't suddenly cut 15 drafts down to let's do it in 4. I won't give up on that process until I'm down to changing maybe a word every 2 or 3 pages, maybe adding a sentence every 10 pages, maybe adding a paragraph every 50 pages. So I know when I've come to the end, it's when I'm doing so little on the craftsmanship side that I have to hand it in. But it doesn't get in until I really believe I've reached that stage.
I've talked to a few writers who they also read their work out loud. Is that a practice you do, or how do you?
I do it when I'm writing. Do they mean after?
After, just to see how.
Oh, no, I do it when I'm writing, especially with speech. So if I walked into the room and he said, "Good morning, Fred. Why is that dagger sticking in the back of your neck?" Yes, and you think, "Oh, that's stupid. That doesn't work." You have to So yes, I do read things out, or I just say them as I'm writing it. I say them out loud. And then if you don't do that, you don't really get the feel of speech. And that's very important, because it's the speech that actually makes a novel go quickly. You've obviously got to do the descriptive work. You've obviously got to do the background work, but it's actually the vocal part that makes the page turn very quickly indeed. Now, if you get the vocal part right, if the way they sound is correct, people turn the page. If it slows you down, that's a disadvantage. So I work very hard on making all the speeches sound as if they're realistic.
If you're working hard on the speech, what comes easiest to you when you're writing? Is it the description? Is it the background work?
I think probably the speech comes easiest because having been a politician and enjoying public speaking, I suspect that comes easiest. And I suspect a lot of the crafting, the hard work, will come in the description.
And I'm just going to stick with your work before we hop into this most recent book. I'm just so fascinated because you do have 27 books. You've written so many great books. What inspires you? Are you reading other thrillers still? Are you reading other crime novels?
I'm inspired by wanting to sell, by wanting to be read. Yes. That's the thing that inspires me. I know millions of people, as you kindly pointed out, have read the book, but there are still millions who haven't. And that inspires me to work harder and hope that I will capture people who've never even heard of me. That's the hardest thing for any author, mean, a lot of authors have fan clubs and a lot of authors have people who follow them regularly, but they'd have a lot more people following them regularly if they knew about their books or if they'd read them and then felt, I mean, I love the letters say that I've only just discovered you. They're the wonderful letters. They're the ones I most like. When you talk about inspiration, I have in all of my books always taken top advice. I've always gone to people who know their job. So in the William Warwick series, he goes from being a constable on the beat to a detective sergeant, to a detective inspector. And in the book, you have detective chief inspector. Well, I have a chief superintendent who retired with a mental breakdown. He was head of the murder squad at Scotland Yard, and he had a mental breakdown, and he described it as one murder too many. And when he retired, a young man, I was only early 50s, young man, and he very kindly became my chief researcher. So he reads the books and says, well, you can do that, Jeffrey, but you can't do that. I would never have been allowed to do that. Or he'd say, you could do this, but you'll also have to add that. So I've got a really top man and a really top woman of a detective, Sergeant Michelle Roycroft, who was in the drug squad for 20 years, sitting on my shoulder saying, you can't do that, you can't do that. So the two of them together make sure that anyone reading the book says, wow, this is right. And that's because of the two of them. And just occasionally, they give you a little vignette as well. But their main strength is to make it feel authentic.
And Warwick, you've written a few novels with him now. What interests you about his story specifically? He's climbed the ladder, as you said in all your books. Why keep returning to him instead of creating another detective?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I'd done the Clifton Chronicles, and that was the story about Harry Clifton, a boy in the back streets of Bristol in England, who, and we follow him for 7 books, right from his days until he meets, while he goes to school, he wins a scholarship to Bristol Grammar School, and then he meets an aristocrat and falls in love with his sister. So I was doing that, and his job in life was he was a writer, and he goes to #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list, and writing about a man called William Warwick. So a lot of fans were writing to me saying, we love the Clifton Chronicles, but we'd now like a William Warwick. And it did not cross my mind. And I suddenly thought, yes, there's all these millions of people who've read the Clifton Chronicles. They now want William Warwick. So that's how it started. And then I had to pick up your point, Adam, had this idea that I would make him a constable on the beat and go through 8 books. And this is the 4th. And each book would be a different subject. So you can read any book you like. The order's not important. And each rank would be different. So he'd begin his life as a detective constable, and he'd end his career as commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. Now, the only problem with this is that I, Adam, have to live to the age of 86 if he's going to become commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. I've no doubt, Adam, that he's capable of becoming commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, but can I reach 86? So the Clifton Chronicles, I begged for that when I was 70, and at 80 I started begging to be allowed to do this. So I'm hoping to get to the end and put William as commissioner.
Do you know what the next 4 books are going to look like, or do you just let them unfold when you start each one?
No, I do know the ranks.
Yes, of course.
I think I know the subjects. For example, the next book is the next book after the murder book is Royal Protection, which hasn't been. I've never known anybody write a novel on Royal Protection. So I took advice from Her Majesty the Queen's private detective, Princess Diana's private detective, and Princess Anne's private detective, and so gave them the book and said wherever, and they pointed out the mistakes I'd made, and gave me some anecdotal stories as well. So again, when you read about Diana, or you read about the Queen, or you read about this, you can be sure from the protection side, I've actually got it because they did the job for several years.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the first draft is 40 days, correct? Roughly?
About 40 days, about 300 hours.
And because I'm looking at all your books. I mean, the Clifton Chronicles, a book a year. But William Warwick, a book a year almost. So we should expect, I mean, Over My Dead Body just came out this month. So we should expect the next one within the next year then.
Next year, in a year's time. If I can keep that up.
Yes. I'm
physically quite fit. I'm in the gym 2-3 times a week. I try to walk 10,000 paces a day. So I'm hoping that I will be able to do the next 4 in the next 4 years. And I've got into this annual routine, which I like very much. It suits me to do the drafts the way I do them and to write the book side. But your much more important point, and I take it, is you've actually got to have ideas for the next one. You can't just say, I'm going to do one next year. And then if you haven't got an idea. So I know this one that is coming is police protection. And that's been going now, that's been simmering now for 6 months. And I'm on about the 8th draft. And I will hand that in, I would guess about December.
Wow. I am blown away by your dedication to your craft, to writing. I've talked to writers who it takes 10 years to write one book, and it's just amazing. I'm blown away.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Mark. The truth is, I mean, the truth is that I'm very lucky because the ideas come every day.
Yeah.
If I was talking to a dear friend of mine who's been in the profession of literature and of books and of libraries and the whole thing. And he said he has people on, he's people known for years who used to ring him up and say, I don't know what to do next. The last book did quite well. I don't know where to go. I don't know where to start. That has never happened for me. So I've been very, very lucky because the longevity is the big deal, in fact, that you go from a young age right through to your 80s and you still have the privilege of writing, and the much greater privilege that your fans stick with you. And the most touching thing now is the young people who are writing to me, who are 14, 15, 16, saying, I've just read Cain and Abel. It's been out for 40 years, but it's wonderful to hear a young person writing saying, I've just read Cain and Abel.
Yeah, that is so amazing. I was talking to your son before we started talking, and my father is a huge fan of yours. He doesn't read much, but he's read all of the Clifton Chronicles, and he was so excited that I got to talk to you. And so you have fans all over, like 14-year-olds, and then my father's in his 60s, who's been reading you probably his entire life, I guess. Whenever I talk to a writer who's written so many books, I always like to ask, what advice would you give yourself on your first book? Is there anything you've learned over the past 27 books?
Oh, yes, but you can't do anything about it, Mark. You go to your first book with no experience, no knowledge, and you learn as each page turns. Oh, yes, now when I sit down, I've done it 27 times, so I know roughly what I'm going to go through. It's a bit like marathon runners. I once saw at the Olympic Games an Irishman come second in the marathon, and it was his first ever marathon. And I chatted to him years later. He said, I couldn't do it again because I knew what I went through and the agony it was. And so when I went to do my second one, I didn't want to do it. I'm the other way around. Each one's been more and more fun. I still enjoy it. And I think actually I'll stop if I don't enjoy it. If no stories are coming and I don't enjoy it, what's the point? But I do enjoy it, and the stories are still coming. But the more shrewd question you asked is, what advice would I give? I'd give it to a young writer. I'd say, be disciplined. You may be a lark, you may be an owl. I'm a lark. My wife, Mary, is an owl. She can quite happily write 10, 11, 12 at night. I can't. I'm sound asleep by then. She doesn't like to get up at 6 in the morning. She arrives at breakfast around 8. So we're very, very different. So most people are larks or owls. And I also say to aspiring writers, do what suits you. If you want to do it in a broom cupboard, pouring cold water over you or drinking pina coladas, if that works for you, do it. I have my own system. It's not, you don't have to follow it. We all have our, I met an author the other day who can write for 4 hours without stopping. I can't. I could not do 4 hours. My brain and body is physically racked after 2 hours. That's when I take the 2-hour rest and I'm ready to go back.
Yes. Yeah, everyone writes differently. We have a few questions. One question is about you've mentioned Warwick is going to be 4 more novels after this. Are there any other stories you want to tell or any other characters? Or are you just focusing on him right now?
No, my whole life at the moment is focused on William Warwick and on his, you see, they're not detective stories. They're a story about a detective and his amazing wife, who is the deputy director of an art gallery in London, a national art gallery in London, and they're equals. They're not the women. And I've always had in my books very powerful women. My wife, Mary, was chairman of Cambridge University's hospitals and is now chairman of the Science Museum. And she's the first woman in Britain ever to chair a national gallery or museum. So I've lived with a strong woman for 55 years. I had the privilege and honor of working for Margaret Thatcher for 11 years. And my mother was a strong woman. She didn't take her degree until she was 52 years old. She was that generation. So I've lived with strong women all my life, and they get into my books. And I would say also to young authors, Mark, write what you know about. If your mother is a strong person, you'll want to write about strong women. But whatever you experience, if you write it, people reading will go, oh, yeah, that's him. That's him or her. Clearly that's happened to her. And she's telling us. You don't have to write a ghost story. You don't have to write a violent story. You don't have to swear every few words because people think that's fashionable. Tell a good story. People turn the page. I mean, I'm actually, if you look at my books, right from the first, even when I was young, I was old-fashioned. And people still call me old-fashioned, but I've still got 16 and 17-year-olds queuing up when the book comes out. So I'm not going to change that either.
And then another question is about, you mentioned you have the story on your first draft. You know it's going to be. Does that mean you have the ending always? Does the ending ever change while you're drafting?
Not really, no. I would say that the first draft is the story. Mm-hmm. Let us get the story on paper. Now let's craft it. But I like to get, as Kipling said, the beginning, the middle, and the end done before I go into the crafting session. Yeah.
And then I know it's late there, so just one more thing. You said you handwrite, so you don't like computers. What's the best way to get in contact with you for fans? Do you want them to write letters? How do you want them to?
Well, I'm so keen to talk to fans and get hundreds of letters every week, emails every week. So and I love that because it tells me what they feel. And the answer is, if you look on the back of the book, Mark, you'll see the 3 ways of getting in touch with me, 3 clear ways of getting in touch with me. And over the years, thousands of people have. And it's taught me a lot because they say, I like this, I don't like that. I think you should do it. And some of them are very funny and some of them are very serious. But it's, again, a privilege to have someone, as you said at the beginning of this, my father's a great fan. Well, that's a great honor for me that your father is a great fan. And so, yes, you'll find everything. I think it's on the back or on the inside cover, every way of getting in touch with me.
Perfect. Well, Mr. Jeffrey Archer, thank you so much. I want to keep it short and just talk about your career.
No, I've got all night. I'm fine.
I mean, I think we're running out of time, but you have taught me so much. My final question is, what you mentioned you remember Tattered Cover. What do you mind talking about that again? I know we did.
It's a strange experience. My son and I was touring. I think it may have been with The Prodigal Daughter, the follow-up to Cain and Abel. Mm-hmm. And the Tattered Bookshop, the Tattered Cover, the Tattered Cover was on, and I've told people about it for years since. because one thing stuck in my mind. And, you know, I've been to a few bookshops in my life, but it was run by a very fierce lady who was quite frightening and told me exactly how many books I would sign, where I would sit. And I did say to her rather casually, there don't seem to be many men in sight. She said, I don't employ men. And I've never forgotten that. And that shop was beautifully run. I remember it with sort of admiration. And the fact that I even remember it, having traveled all around the United States, all around Europe. So it must be a remarkable bookshop for to have stayed in my memory for 30 years.
Yes, well, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who virtually attended. It was just amazing. Thank you for talking to us.
No, today. Thank you very much, Mark. And thank you for those kind people who keep on reading me. I'm very grateful.
Well, I hope you enjoy your writing session tomorrow at 6 a.m.
Thank you, sir.
Have a great evening. Thank you.
You too.